Hi everybody, this is Mike Oppenheim and you are listening to Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. And this week we have a guest. His name is John Lawyer. He was a soldier in desert combat zones before he began to face a battle within, and he became a spiritual seeker. He now guides a non-profit spiritual community for people to share their journey while still navigating the path himself. So obviously he's a natural fit for Coffin Talk, which is a giant wide open net to catch any and all spiritual communities and share them with each other. So welcome to the show, John. How are you doing?
Good, Mike. Thanks for having me on. How are you?
I'm very good. And we had to reschedule a little bit, so thank you again for being flexible. It's always a plus. And our first question that we always ask our guests is, how old are you? Where did you grow up? And what generation, if any, do you consider yourself a member of?
I'm 42 years old. I grew up in a small town in rural Oklahoma. And the generation thing is an interesting question. It's, I was born in 81, May of 81. And so I'm kind of a millennial, like extra/millennial. It's hard to tell because we had that analog life, but we also had that digital life.
Totally. We're the same age. I was born in June of 81, so that's hilarious.
Okay.
I totally identify with you.
I got you.
And rural Oklahoma, so that's interesting. I'm sure it was either boring or fun or both. What was it like?
It was boring and fun in both. I grew up in town about 8,000 people. It was a pretty nice community, and our family had a shared farm out of town, so I spent kind of afternoons and weekends there a lot. So I had a good childhood, but I was definitely ready to get out.
Gotcha. And so in your bio, it says you were a soldier. I'm assuming a soldier for the United States?
Yeah, U.S. Army. I enlisted in the Army straight out of high school.
Oh, okay. And were you desert combat zones? We talking Middle East or?
Yeah, I spent 2.5 years of my 5-year enlistment in Kuwait. And then I became a civilian doing the same type of work I was doing in the Army. And I was in Baghdad for over a year and a half. And then I spent 6.5 years.
Wow. So I think I'm most surprised that you said you stayed as a civilian and helped. How was that transition? Like, how did that work?
Well, when I got out of the Army, I kind of had a choice where I could go be a civilian working overseas, or I could go get a job in like Washington, D.C. in the Beltway and, work in a 3-letter agency in a cubicle and, battle the 495 traffic for 2 hours each day. And I couldn't do that. I wasn't prepared to do that. So I just decided to stay overseas and keep doing what I did. I kind of loved my job and I was really dedicated to it. I was good at it. So, plus my wife did the same thing that I did. So we actually stayed over there together.
Oh, that's really cool. It's funny, whenever I hear about the 495, that's how I learned to drive a stick, was in rush hour traffic on the 495. It was the worst experience of my life.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah. And how is, because I used to teach ESL and we did a lot of cross-cultural communication. It sounds like you and your wife are excellent at that, but what is it like to be cross-culturally communicating with that area, especially like specifically Baghdad and Iraq?
Yeah, for me, I lived in, I was in Baghdad for 18 months. It was an interesting experience culturally. Having spent 2.5 years in Kuwait, it made it a lot easier. I was familiar with the Arab culture and the Middle Eastern culture, and I studied it. And when I was in Kuwait, I spent some time actually living out on the economy, even though I was a soldier. I wore civilian clothes and did counterintelligence work. And so, I actually got out to meet people and talk to people, and it was a very engaging experience. And it's nice to be able to get, diverse perspectives and like broaden your worldview, even as a soldier.
Yeah. And I think I'm asking, obviously you're a kind and spiritual gentleman, so that's part of why I'm asking, because I think we live in like very dangerous times where stereotypes are just running rampant about like specifically the Middle East and like just all of it, like all Gulf states, the whole region, also like the history of United States involvement. And, you and I are the same age, so we both grew up like watching Scud missiles on TV in the first Gulf War. So, that definitely affected us.
Well, yeah. And what's funny is when I was at Camp Doha in Kuwait as a soldier, we got ballistic missiles launched at us during the invasion of Iraq. So, wow. I watched it on TV as a kid, right? Like we did. And then like we knew the Patriots didn't work in the first Gulf War. They didn't work right. And so we're like, are they going to work right this time? They did. But it was wild. Like we have inbound, it launched from satellite you'd know it was coming for 2 minutes, and you'd hope the Patriot worked when it got there.
It's incredible.
Pretty wild. But the thing is, the thing about it is, the longer I was in the military industrial complex, the more I appreciated the humanity of all of us, not soldiers, not the civilians in the middle, not the quote unquote enemy, whatever that means. But the humanity of it all, that we're all just people. You know, we all want the same things for ourselves: safety and security and happiness, and our children to be educated and successful, and for us to have healthy lives. You know, it's what we all want.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love the way you phrase that, because I think it's such an ironic conclusion to someone who never like meets soldiers and stuff like that. And I was one of those people at first, because I grew up in the Bay Area, and like it's not a military culture there. It's not, and for people listening at home, I grew up there in the 80s and 90s. It is such a different place now because of tech and everything else. So I just would beg you to listen to this story without like a modern lens. So we were not like anti-soldiers or anti-military, and it was like a very normal American city,
right.
but it wasn't pro. You know, there's no military base anywhere near us. I never saw soldiers in like combat gear. None of the flights I took in and out of SFO had like soldiers on them. And then when I went to Pitt, I met not only a ton of ROTC people, but, you know, some of my friends went on to serve. Many of them are still serving. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for the military, for the people in the military. I don't have a tremendous amount of respect for what you refer to as the military industrial complex, but I'm at peace with that because of people like you explaining to me what you just did. So I'm really glad you said that on this podcast. And I'm curious, like, how do you feel now, even more removed from it all? Like, what do you think peacekeeping involves standing militaries?
I think that all wars are inherently political. I'm out of politics. I'm a spiritual person, right?
Yeah.
But I can look back and say that all warfare, after you get past the first like 2 or 3 days, it's just politics after that.
Wow.
It's generals are politicians. I mean, you know, there's money. Like when I was in Iraq, when I was in Afghanistan and Kuwait as well, but especially Iraq and Afghanistan, I saw all this money being spent, and people don't realize it. Like there's people like me and my brothers and sisters in arms. We're trying to do the right thing and try to do helpful things, and you suggest it to people that are in charge, and there's no interest in doing anything but the status quo, which is making that machine move and keeping it active, that military industrial complex machine. And I think that it does some good things around the world. Don't get me wrong. I think that we've seen small regional wars over time since World War II. A lot of that's because of the U.S. military industrial complex keeping some level of security around the world. But that doesn't take away from there's a great darkness and evil there too. And I don't mean that, I don't want to sound like I'm condemning it. Mm-hmm. It's just fact, you know, it just is.
No, I mean, honestly, you know, I'm a vibe kind of person. Your vibe is definitely not like nasty, vindictive, bitter. And I think it's important for people to really think about this stuff because like, it's a contagious element that like if we have too many little wars and they all start to group together, which we're kind of seeing, you know, seedlings of right now, it could get really hot really fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. And so let's move it to the spiritual side because that's a beautiful transition. Now that you are, and I'm saying now that you're a spiritual man, not that like you were utterly devoid of spirituality before, but now that that's your main calling and how you refer to yourself, what is your ultimate goal as a spiritual seeker and someone who's, you know, somewhat of a spiritual leader now?
I had a moment a couple of years ago where it was like a very profound moment of understanding or clarity. And I knew my higher purpose or my dharma was to go out and not help people, but help people help themselves and find their wholeness inside, whether they saw it or not, find their light, even if they don't think it's there. And maybe if they were just curious or questioning, to find some footing on a path that maybe it took me a long time to find. And so that's kind of my purpose, and that's what I do now.
That's really cool. That's beautiful. What was that like moment? Was it something you can explain to our audience?
I can try. I was laying in bed with my wife. She was asleep. It was late at night, and suddenly the universe just made sense to me. I wasn't really on a spiritual path. I think we're all on a journey, whether we know it or not, but I didn't know it. Mm-hmm. And suddenly I realized I was, and I realized this oneness with the universe and how we're all connected and this wholeness. And it was very warm, kind of loving kindness kind of situation. And everything just kind of made sense.
Wow. That's beautiful. I definitely understand that. It's funny. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and usually it's just comedians. That's like my favorite way to kind of, just not get into politics and things like that. So I don't listen to like serious podcasts, but comedians can also get serious. And I just listened to one yesterday where the guy was talking about in his like mid-20s, he took a lot of magic mushrooms and he had the exact experience you're describing. And then he said the most regrettable part though was that it left, and then he ignored it for the next 15 years. And he's like, and now I'm back there without the drugs. But I always find that like interesting, because like, I wish it was as simple as like, oh, just put a little LSD in everyone's water supply and we'll all have this like moment. But, I know that's not how it works. And also I know that what you had lasts. Like, when the moment is a pure connection moment and you're like lying in bed, it's a lot more real, and you can't just like write it off to something else. So I am curious, do you ever have like moments of not doubt from that about that moment, but do you ever like have really hard days where you just don't feel like trying as hard to help other people learn how to help themselves?
That's a great question, Mike. I think that yes, absolutely have moments where I feel really human. Mm-hmm. And I feel, I think we all have those moments where we get discouraged or don't have the energy or the focus. It's not super often, but it's still something that happens. And that's why I say that I'm a seeker and a teacher at both, because I think we're always learning, and we're always looking at ways to center and ground ourselves and kind of stay on that path that you want to stay on. I mean, it's kind of a choice, right? Like, I chose this life, mm-hmm. and I'm really at peace and calm with that. But there's days that are hard. Sure.
Yeah. I'm asking because, I'm on the similar path, and it's just like interesting for me to take stock of people. And, you remind me not of myself like in a narcissistic way at all, but just like we're the same age. We've lived the same like movie, like we've both been watching the exact same movie. So it's really fascinating for me. And I am at this time where like I'm watching people our age give up hope, which is like shocking to me and very disheartening. And so I'm like trying to double down on it. But then when I have these low energy days, or these days where I'm just like, well, if everyone else is going to be selfish, maybe I should just like not be selfish the way they are, but at least just take this like positivity and just close the doors, So let me preface the normal question, which is, what do you think happens when you die? But I'd like to also, because you were a soldier and because you've served and like seen life and death in situations where at least that's at stake, I'm curious if it ever changed between that, like before that, during that, and after that.
That's a really deep question. I love that you asked your guest this. I love your podcast.
Thank you.
It's a hard question to answer. I'll do my best. For me, I was around death in the military. I had people that were close to me die when I was in certain units. So I saw it firsthand. Like, I didn't see them die necessarily, right? But I was there when it happened. I saw friends die from suicide, later on, after the wars were done and they were done with the wars. And I was also a part of killing people and picking targets or, dropping bombs very deliberately, that kind of thing, which is hard to talk about, but I think it's important. I thought about this last night before I came on your show. And I think when you're a part of death, it's this deep darkness. It touches you in ways that I don't think you can ever be untouched, and it definitely had an impact on me then. At the time, it's had an impact on me since, and it has an impact on me now. I'm not as attached to those traumas as I used to be. I've made my peace and I've moved on in the world, but it's still a part of who I am, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And I believe that if you've seen great darkness, you've kind of stared into that abyss. It gives great contrast to the light and makes you appreciate it more, makes you see it more clearly. Even though I believe we're probably that gray balance walking in between light and dark, we can decide whether we're going to look at the dark or we're going to look at the light. So I have that choice to look at the light. And now my opinion on death now is, I'm much more at peace with it than I used to be, especially from a personal perspective. I think watching other people die is more difficult, family members and friends and such. But I do believe in that very Hindu samsara, birth, life, death, and rebirth.
Wow. And did that were you reading like Buddhist philosophy back in Oklahoma before you joined? Was this something like after the epiphany you had when you were lying in bed? Like, when did you get into that?
That's a good question too. I wasn't on a spiritual journey, right? I wasn't a spiritualist. So I had this moment and I was like, man, this is awesome. But I'm like, I don't know how to talk about this to anybody because I don't know the vernacular and the vocabulary. And so I think I read 60 books in 4 months.
Wow.
And I would rotate between Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and Christianity and Islam and philosophy and self-help. And I would just kind of like read a rotation through those genres. And that's helped a lot to be able to talk to people about it because I want to be able to communicate. I think that's really so important for people like you and I having this conversation is so important. Mm-hmm. And you having this conversation with other people is important, right? So that's what I want to do.
That's so cool. And I was very curious, because when you said my dharma, that's like my new favorite word. And because it actually cuts to the chase. It's not like what I want to do. It's not what I'm supposed to do. It's what I'm doing and what I'm going to do. And it's like stepping into that is, maybe it's just something we do in our 40s. Maybe that's just like a 40s thing. Like your 20s is like very selfish in my opinion. And then your 30s is like, you're kind of like, whoa, I'm aging. Wow. Like this ride is way different than I thought. Yeah. Cause I'm in a similar spot where like, I want to do much more for other people. And that's such a good feeling, but I'm nowhere near what you're doing. Cause I do want to get into your nonprofit spiritual community. Can you name it and describe it?
Yeah, we decided to name it Kishar. It's named after the Sumerian goddess of Mother Earth or Gaia. Cool. And it also represents the line on the horizon, which we think kind of beautifully encapsulates that journey that we're all on. And and that's what the community is about. It's about people sharing their journey with each other and saying, I'm going to have my very fierce and own unique spiritual path that I walk. And it's going to look different for you and you and you. But what if we could walk those paths as individuals and be empowered individually, but we can stand next to each other and talk about it and have a community and practice our own individual belief, philosophy, or faith and still talk about it with one another and have kind of an engaging, authentic, meaningful connection in the digital world is possible in this technical era that we have.
That's really cool. So you're an online group or are you also in person?
We're online, and eventually we're going to start rolling out in-person physical spiritual retreats, that kind of thing, eventually to have that human connection. But we're all online so far.
That's really cool. And I'm curious, like I've participated in many spiritual groups, I would say. And a lot of it was like incidental. Like I would just be bumbling through life and I'd like step into one and I'd be like, oh, this kind of is fun. But I have noticed that a lot of them attract people that are, as a former teacher, difficult to manage in a classroom. So I'm not talking these people as like humans, and I'm not saying that they're bad or good, but I'm saying that they're difficult in group situations. Have you encountered that, and what is that like for you, like dealing with that?
For me, I love doing this. This is my purpose. It's my dharma, so it makes it easy. And cool. I people that we attract tend to be pretty open-minded and pretty grounded for the most part. And, every now and then it requires, with humans, there's always going to be that classroom effect like you talked about. There's always going to be some drama. Mm-hmm. But it's kept to a pretty easy, manageable level so far. We have kind of our own digital platform, and it's kind of walled off from other social media and stuff. So it's more quiet, it's more peaceful, it's more calm space. And so I think that works for people.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I was asking because I think for me it's kind of like the larger question, which is like, it took me a long time to come to terms with this, and I'm curious if you agree or disagree. But I am now of the philosophy that when you're supposed to like love everyone, it doesn't mean you actually like them. It just means you have like respect and give them their space. And the reason I'm saying this is because I find as the world gets smaller and we're starting to see how much we're all interconnected, I think it terrifies a lot of people when someone says something like, you have to love everyone. And they're like, well, I can't love this person. They're very different from me in a way that isn't like bigoted. They're just like literally different. Like they annoy me. I don't like their presence. And so I love that there's little pockets of spiritual communities, because I think that's actually the best way to do everything. So I said, I was curious if you agree with me. Like, do you feel that same kind of like pull, or do you think there really could be this like kumbaya culture where like every human on earth is getting along?
Hey everyone, if you're a fan of the show, please head over to mikeyop.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's MIKEYOPP.com. Thanks.
No, I think we're very tribal beings, and we always will be tribalistic, and we're meant to live in whatever tribe fits us the best.
Yeah.
And I think people should go find out what works for them. And it's just and that whole idea of if that person's not for you, then just let them go, and don't be attached to what they're doing, because it's really not going to impact you too much.
Yeah. And how much do you believe, like, as a spiritual person, because specifically, like, when you mentioned Hinduism, they believe, like, there's, just clear cycles of humanity, and that we're currently in the end phases of what's called Kali Yuga, and then after this is, like, the golden age of enlightenment. Right. Do you buy into that? Do you believe that? And I'm saying that stuff, like, not in a mean way.
No, I appreciate your question. I subscribe to parts of Hinduism that really resonate with me, but I don't think that we're in that phase necessarily. Mm-hmm. I think that we're pretty happy and healthy as a world. The world's in pretty good shape. I think that I have great faith in where humanity's at, where it's going, and there's so much good happening in the world every day that we don't see. Mm-hmm. So I don't subscribe that we're in this like negative, like kind of soul crushing age necessarily.
That's so good to hear. I'm really happy you said that. I'm glad I'm going to release this podcast soon, because I feel like specifically the media and advertisers, they love the attention that this conversation gets, that this like doom and gloom, we're on the precipice of World War III. This is like the end of democracy as we know it. There's going to be a civil war like in our country and other countries.
Right.
And it's just like, I get it. Of course, I could like read that version of history in the future and believe it. And if someone handed me a book and said that's what happens, I'd be like, okay, that's a plausible plot. But what you said is actually way more likely, which is the average person is very happy right now. They're very healthy. And we live in like a burgeoning age of great technology that's connecting us. So I'm so glad you said that. I'm always trepidatious when I ask that question to people, because I don't want to hear, I'm biased. I want to hear what you said. But you have a very different perspective from me, and a great one. So where are you currently living?
I live in North Texas, about an hour out of Dallas.
Okay, cool. So do you ever travel to other countries still, or are you like pretty much staying home now?
I pretty much stay home now. I've seen a bit of the world, and had that experience. I would like to travel again someday. But lately I've just been kind of hanging out in the U.S.
No, that's cool. That's why I asked, because I figured there's got to be a point of saturation where you just kind of like, all right. Because I lived on and off in Thailand briefly. I was married to someone from there, and I liked it, but it's hard. I am an American. As much as I might have like chased that title and like seen what it would do for me as a younger person, I do feel at home here, and that's why it was interesting to hear your answer, because I feel like you definitely, we're like I said, we're watching the same movie. Is there anything else you want to?
This country's awesome. It's easy to live in.
Yeah.
U.S. is easy to live in.
No, and it's cool, and it's such a weird age where like the word patriot is like, it could be derogatory, it could be like a kind thing you say, and then like, just everything, even like standing up for national anthems has like a weird like philosophical thing in my head now. So I'm just I'm constantly questioning like loyalty versus respect and appreciation, and I'm trying to find a balance. So I
love that. I love that.
Yeah. How do you feel like what do you think is the trajectory spiritually for Earth in the next couple of months, maybe a year? Like, do you feel we're on the up and up? Do you think things are going to continue to get more spiritual?
I believe that, like you talk about how connected we are, I think people have access to all this information and they're using it. And I think that does help raise the consciousness of the world. And I think that points us in a positive direction in the near term and the medium and long term. Absolutely.
That's cool. And do you interact in your work? Is it people our age, people older, people younger? Like, what's the mix?
It's a mix. Yeah, I'd say it's people our age, probably down into their 30s, and then up to 50s, 60s. But it's probably our age down into the 30s, some 20s. It's pretty diverse group. But it doesn't feel old. It has a bit of youthful energy to it.
Cool. I was hoping that would be your answer, because I am like very curious about. I see everyone in our whatever generation we're in, because we already covered that. But they tend to make fun of the younger people for like being into crystals and energy and spirituality, and I just find it hilarious that like that's a negative and that it's being made fun of, because to me, I'm like, oh, thank God, that would be so cool if like I'd much rather have people believe in crystals than shooting people at schools, for example. I'll take that anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, we're heading towards the end of the interview. You're really an interesting person, and you're very eloquent. Like you answer things. I think it's probably partly military. Like I think you don't waste space or words, but I do want to get more out of you because you have this big heart and you really care. So what is something that like you're excited to share with our audience about the work you're doing, or just a perspective you have?
Sure. I always like to tell people, you have more time than you think. Just use it. It's there, right? It's right there with you. And don't chase perfection in this world. It's not something we have to chase. And love yourself and care about yourself. And that's the first thing you should ever do is love yourself.
Wow, that's really cool. Well, John, I can't thank you enough. This was such a pleasure to meet you and talk to you. And I'm excited, and I'm definitely going to check out your group, and we'll have notes with everything online. But real quick, can you name it again for people listening?
Yeah, it's Kishar, Kishar.
Awesome. Please seek it out, everyone. John, thank you for bringing spirituality to the world. Thank you for bringing your unique perspective to our show. And thank you for just being like one of the good people. I feel more confident every time I interview someone like you, because I know that we're an army, the people like you and I that are just out to try to help people help themselves. And I think that's really the most noble work you can do. To everyone listening at home, once again, you've been listening to Coffin Talk. My name is Mike Oppenheim. The best way to support the show is just to head over to MikeyOpp.com. That's MikeyOpp.com, and join my weekly mailing list where I send you philosophical, I would say ramblings, but then people say that's a negative word, but I think that's a funny way to put it. But anyway, they're short, concise, spiritual essays. Sometimes they're just funny essays about my daughter learning to aim her pee and things like that. So head over to MikeyOpp.com if you want to help support the show. Once again, my name is Mike Oppenheim. You've been listening to Coffin Talk, and we will see you soon.